As a pastor, you hear all kinds of different things. People have all kinds of different ideas about church and about messages from God and all that kind of stuff. Michelle always says, I pray that you say what God would have you to say, and I know what she means by that. But some people, I plan ahead a lot of times, and I'll have sermons, kind of lined out, and people go, "Wow, that's kind of relying on the Spirit." Today, I'm really relying on the Spirit. Okay. If you get my gist. We're in a series called Focused, and we're looking at the book of Colossians. We're kind of going, not line by line, but we're going, section by section through this letter that Paul wrote to these very first Christians in the town of Colossae. And if you think about it, they're trying to figure out what this whole thing looks like, right? And what it means and so forth. And so they're kind of being Christianity, or not even Christianity, because I don't think that Jesus ever intended for having a following be a denomination. In other words, be Lutheran or Protestant. Luther's after Luther, right? And you have all these different groups, and they're kind of man-made. And Jesus his intent was never like to have a group, right? In other words, like try to understand what I mean when I say this, right? He doesn't care if you're a Muslim or a Jew or whatever, because it's about Jesus. You know what I'm saying? That's what Paul's getting at here in Colossae. Look, this isn't like a formula or something. It's about Jesus and what he did, period. It's simple. And so we're looking at this letter, and Paul's saying, you're making it too complicated, and you're letting people kind of lead you astray. And so that's where we're at. If you haven't seen the last two, I highly recommend you watch the last two, especially last week's, and watch it and really try to think about it, because these are all kind of building one on top of the other. And today, right? So if first we talked about 2 weeks ago, it's about Jesus. It's really simple. It's the simple gospel. And last week we talked about how we all have a lack in our life, right? How we all have something where, we feel like something's missing, and society tells us, advertising tells us, well, drive a Lincoln or buy this or get $1 million and you'll be satisfied. Your lack will be fulfilled. And what our human experience is over and over again is, no matter what it is, once you get that, you realize, well, that didn't satisfy, right? It must be something else or something more. And then the trouble is, what happened in Colossae, what happens today, is that the church comes along and says, well, see, none of those things satisfy. What satisfies is Jesus. I heard that. That's what satisfies. But then somebody comes into the church and they say, okay, that's what satisfies, and so they accept or believe or pray or do whatever that thing is, right? And then they start to discover that, wow, I still have that lack. Must be something wrong with me. Because I look around and there's all these people that say, Jesus is all you need. It's all I need. And you think, well, what's wrong with me then? It must be so. And what happened in Colossae, what happens today? Well, I must not have all of it. And so we start pursuing all these different kind of things, right? Go to this revival, chase this, go change churches, do whatever to find that filling of our lack. And we never find it. Then we think something's wrong with us. Then we give up. And young people leave the church today because they're like, it's just ridiculous. It's no different than anything else, right? The church is just selling Jesus. The other places are selling other things. Whereas freedom, we talked about last week, comes from Jesus coming along and saying, listen, it's okay. This is human condition. It's what you're going to experience here. And you get free from the ever pursuit of the lack of being fulfilled, right? And realize, because you think about this for a minute. Somebody goes to college, right? My boys are both in college. You work really hard for 4 years, right? And you study, and you finally graduate. And after graduation day, you're like, okay, what now, right? You achieved that thing. And once you achieve it, you're like, oh. And now you're back to square one. You're somewhere else. Now you got to try to find a job or whatever. Or you spend the next 3 years at Starbucks just surfing the internet, right? And so life is really, and we've said it over and over again, I hope you're kind of putting it all together, life is about the journey. It's always the journey. Christmas is wonderful, but after Christmas Day, it's kind of a letdown, right? It's because it's the build up to it. It's wonderful. We had a little golf outing this weekend, and the whole build up to it and through it, and now it's over. It's kind of, what next? What do we go on to next? It's the same thing when it comes to the church, right? You have one experience, you go, oh, that's it. No, that wasn't it. I'll chase something else. And Paul comes along and he says, no, listen, it's not that. It's not any of those things. It's just simple. It's just simple. This is a great life. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life in its most abundant form. And you live your life experiencing the journey, not ever trying to attain something, some nirvana, some utopia that finally you're there. Because if you did get there, then what? Then what, right? And so now, okay, so that brings us to this point then. If all that's true, if Jesus loves us and we're accepted, right? We said that you're included and he loves you, and we talked about last week about being free from the pursuit of all this. Okay, then he talks about transformation. They were talking about focusing on transformation. The question would be then, but why? Why do I have to change? So that's what we're going to look at today, okay? We're going to look at some passages in here. Let me start out with a little story. Well, first let me say this. I don't know about you guys, but like this last night, Jeff and Rosanna are staying with us, and they're staying in our rooms. We had to get some clothes and bring downstairs because we were going to get up early and come to church. And so I got my clothes I was going to wear today, and I in essence, it's the same thing I wear all the time. And I had it on the dresser, and Michelle comes over, she picks up this shirt, and she goes, "You're not going to wear this tomorrow, are you?" And I went, "Wow, what's my answer?" "Of course not. I'm not going to wear that. Why would I wear that?" "Yeah, I was going to wear that, And I said, "What's wrong with that?" She goes, "Well, you wore it the past 2 Sundays." I go, "Okay." I'm trying to think where, what she's saying is wrong with that, right? Maybe you women know. I'm not exactly sure. I worked the last 2 Sundays. Okay. It's washed though, right? I mean, I don't know how they get washed, but I put them in this basket and then up in my drawer. So, okay. There was a TV show called What Not to Wear. Anybody see that show? You've seen that show, What Not to Wear? It's really amazing, right? They go through this, and I think about that. I think, Michelle probably wishes sometimes that I would be on that show. They would find me and say, you can't wear the same thing like all the time. But so, I've seen that show kind of, just a few times. What's really interesting about the show is they take somebody, like this one woman I saw, her name was Ellen. She lost like 150 pounds or something like that, but she continued to wear the same clothes that she always wore, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this through the message. It had to do with a lot of things, right? But she wore the same things, and they get her and they say, "Listen, you need to change what you wear. Your clothes need to reflect like who you are now." Are you with me? Right? There was another one I saw. She was a singer out in San Francisco, young girl, but she wore clothes like a 11-year-old girl would wear, And she started to get this following. She started to be really popular, and they said, "Listen, you're a professional, right? You're out performing and so forth. You need to wear clothes that reflect what? Reflect who you are. Who you are." What's really interesting now is here in Colossians, Paul is using, I hope you've been reading along, but Paul is actually doing the same thing, using the same idea, but with Colossians' spirituality, right? And that's where we kind of pick up. He uses this language. I'm going to explain a little bit about it. But he uses this language of clothing, right? And he says things like this. He says, "You have taken off the old self." That's in 2:9. 2:10 says, "And put on the new self." Then he says this, "Clothe yourself with compassion." He says, "Put on love." In other words, what Paul is saying, it's just like the show, what he's saying is, what you're wearing doesn't represent who you are now. He's telling the Colossians this. What you're wearing, right, metaphorically, what you're wearing represents that old self. And he's saying you've taken off the old self. You've put on the new self. So clothe yourself with compassion and put on love. So here's the thing. In Colossae was a lot like, imagine like out the West Coast, like San Francisco. Very much a tourist place, but it was also the center for fashion in the day. Matter of fact, they had a lot of sheep that had wool, and they had this red wool. It's called colossinum. And they would make clothes out of this wool, and it was highly sought after. So the fashion industry was real big there. So what's interesting to me is that Paul is always being relevant to the people that he's speaking with, which is so important, isn't it? I mean, we talk about that even today, trying to be relevant, current today. Because sometimes you read the Bible or whatever. I don't know about you. I do. I read it and I go, sometimes I just don't understand. I've talked to some friends recently and I go, the shame is that the Bible is kind of told to us that that's all you need is the Bible. And you should just read your Bible. And I don't disagree. The trouble is, it's not like you could just pick it up. Are you with me? Just pick it up and read it and go, oh yeah, I get that. How many of you are confused by the Bible? Be honest, raise your hand. Listen, I am too. I'm confused by it. So I have to get other books and other things, and I have to study and I have to read. And Paul said some things I just don't understand. And then the things that I don't understand, they've taken from the Hebrew or the Greek and changed to English, and that changes it again. So it's an English word that I think I know, but the background of it, Paul uses a different word, a Greek word that means something different than what this. You follow me? And it's all rather complicated, And so what Paul is saying, let's cut through all that. It's really simple. It's really simple. I don't want you to be confused. I don't want you to be thrown into a tailspin with all this stuff that people are coming along and say, we need to do this, you need to do this. Have you been there? Have you been in church and thought, well, what do I do next? Or I don't know how to do that. Or they're doing this. What about that church? They say this, and they say this. And man, sometimes, and then young people just go, you know what? I'm done. Because I can't keep up. My aunt told me one time, she said, Jeff, when I grew up Catholic, she's 70, 86 years old, 85. How old are you? I forget how old you are. Anyway, she said when she first started going to church, only the priest could serve communion or Eucharist, right? It was just the wafer, and only the priest could do that. And then things changed, and then it was, and then you couldn't touch it with your hands, right? And I'm not saying any of this is bad. I'm just saying, and then you could take it in your hand and you could serve it to yourself. And then there were some other people that could serve it. And then they allowed women to serve it. You following me? It kept changing. She goes, well, I was led to believe that this was the only way. And now it's changed and I just don't get it anymore. I just don't understand. So Paul brings them back to it not being that complicated. It is really a lot simpler, right? So in this first century, clothing was a big deal. I have to give a little bit of background so you understand why Paul's using this metaphor. Clothing was real important, right, back in the day. So they basically wore like three things to identify. They wore a tunic, which is like an undergarment. Then they wore a toga, maybe not like the sheet you wore in college when you went to a party, but a toga they wrapped around themselves, right? And then men would have a signet ring. Kind of their identity to seal things and so forth, right? And so here's the deal. Let me ask you a question. Like when I get up in the morning, or last night when I picked out my clothes, I pick out my clothes by, I don't know how you pick out your clothes. Maybe you ladies pick it out by fashion. This goes with this is going to look good, and I'm going to wear it because, it looks good. How many of you are that person? Raise your hand, seriously. It looks good. Roseanne, raise your hand like two hands like this and go, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. That's me. Right, exactly. Okay, how many of you pick something out because it's not going to itch, it's going to feel good? That's me. right? Look at that guy, that doesn't feel good, right? That's why I picked that same t-shirt out. It just feels good. It fits me, right? And so we pick our clothes out kind of for that reason. Well, back in the day, it wasn't like that. They didn't choose their clothes based on whether it was a fashion statement, it looked good, in other words, or even that it felt good. They wore their clothes because it represented who they were. So you could walk around and you could look how people were dressed and you knew they were a senator. They were a landowner. They were a slave. You follow me? That's how they dressed. So you can see Paul using this, seeing that and go, oh, this is perfect. This is perfect. This is the metaphor I'm going to use for these new believers in the way, right? Like Jesus comes along and says, I have a new way for you to live. It's a way to live, right? And he goes, I have this perfect metaphor. And so that's what he does. He uses all these kind of phrases to help them understand what it is, right? Now, I know some of you young kids, right? How many of you pick out your clothes based on what's clean? Who does that? Maybe Joe does, right? So listen, we're going to go back a little bit just to kind of recap a little bit. We ended last week just jumping into the third chapter in Colossians. So here's Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. It says this, since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. And he says this, for you died. And he's using this as a metaphor, for you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. What is this all about? What he's saying is that, listen, you were lost in the sense that, just like all of us are trying to figure out, and maybe some of you still are even today, trying to figure out, what is this all about? What's life all about? What are we here for? What am I here for? Right? Ask these big existential questions in life. And he's saying this, that you were raised with Christ. Like you are, there is reason for your being. Right? The life that you have now, that you have died. This old self, this old way of being is gone, and you're free from that. Right? You're free from it. You're free from the bondages of. Now, it may not be evident right away in your life. So he's saying this from a perspective of guilt, maybe, right? Saying that you're free from that. You're free. It's gone. It's done away with because now you're hidden with Christ. So what he's getting at now is he's going to talk about how we live, about being a new person and living, deciding to wear clothes, as it were, to match this new identity that we have in Christ. He says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to the earthly nature. Then he goes in and he starts mentioning some things, right? He says this, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. So he's not trying to have some exhaustive list or anything, but he's just saying some things of, listen, the way you used to live. And he said, you need to put those away. And then he says something interesting. He talks about the wrath of God, right? And what's interesting to me is as I read it and I study more and more, what he's talking about, if you look at these things, let me read them to you again. He says sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. Would you agree with me that those are things that if you're participating, they hurt people? Wouldn't you agree with that? I'd agree that those things hurt people. If you're participating in those kind of things, somebody's going to be hurt. And it's the idea that as if you think about it, if you had children and somebody was behaving this way towards your children, as a parent, how would you feel? You'd feel angry. Right? Why? Because your children are being hurt, and that's what this is saying. That God is angry because of this. He's not angry at you, right? Or angry at human beings. He's angry that his children are being hurt. He hurts when we hurt. And so these things, what Paul is getting at, he's saying this. He's saying, kind of, go through, if Michelle could, she'd go through my closet, right? She'd pick out, throw these things away. Get rid of these things, Like, Jeff, you can't wear a striped pants with a striped shirt this way. You can't do that, And it doesn't fit, doesn't reflect. And that's what Paul is saying. Kind of go through your closet and get rid of those things, right? Because they're hurtful for other people, and ultimately they're hurtful for you. They're hurtful for you. And they don't, and here's the big thing. What he's saying is, Paul's saying, and more importantly, they don't reflect who you are inside. They don't reflect that. And so Paul's saying, listen, you are a new person inside. Not by anything you did, by what Christ did. You're a new person. Now, what he's saying is what you need to do now is you need to dress according to, remember the show, What Not to Wear? What they're saying is this: you need to dress, your dress needs to reflect who you really are. Okay? You follow me so far? Now, here's the thing you're gonna think about, because I do too, is, but I try like not to do these things, and I find myself doing the things I don't want to do. Anybody? Paul says the same thing. Why do I do the things, right, that I know I don't want to do? Things I want to do, I don't do. And there's this kind of war within me, right? And so we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna look at a list of 4 things that really are destructive behavior, right? Destructive behaviors in our life. And I want you to kind of pay attention, maybe even write them down, or at least listen to the 4 of them and think, which one really do I struggle with more than anything else? Now here's the thing. Most of my life in church, when scripture like this was preached to me, this is the way it went, okay? This is 3-point sermon, okay? God says don't do this. You're doing it, stop. Right? That's the 3 points. God said don't do this. You guys are doing it. Stop. I think, okay. And so you go out. Anybody else resonate with that? You go out and you go, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do what anymore? I'm not going to do X. Right? I'm not going to do X. I'm not going to do X. I'm not going to do X. We always joke about playing golf. You know what I mean? Like we go on a tee and Jeff will go, I'll be up there teeing off. He goes, okay, the only place you don't want to be is right. Anywhere else but right. Okay, don't go right. Don't go right. Don't go right. I said, don't go right. I know, I went right. And I go right. I'm talking myself into it. Don't go right. Don't go right. Don't go right. Don't sin. Don't sin. Don't sin. Friends, let me just tell you something. You don't want to focus on that. You don't want to focus on the negative. If you're constantly focusing on the negative, constantly focusing on the don't, what are you going to do? You're going to do that thing, right? You're going to kind of go, think about driving, right? I teach my kids how to drive, at night especially, right? I say, it's hard, but keep your eyes on the road. Focus on the positive. Rather than say, don't look at the lights coming at you, right? If you say that, don't look at the lights coming at you, and all of a sudden, where are you going to go? You're going to look at the lights coming at you. And when you look that way, what happens to the car? Yeah, it starts to, you're not jerking it that way, but your gaze is that way. Slowly the car is going that way. It's kind of the same principle. If that's all you're focused on is the negative about what you're not going to do, chances are you're going to go in that direction. You're going to go and you're going to do those things. So studies have shown these destructive behaviors are often rooted in these things. Number 1 is self-perception. Self-perception. I think my identity in terms of my faults, right? When am I ever going to learn? I'm just always late. I'm always late. That's just who I am. I'm always late. Or it's just like me to lose my temper, right? So we all have this self-talk, don't we? We all have self-talk. I've talked a lot in here about our self-talk. Watch your self-talk. Watch the negative things that you're saying about yourself. Because what they're gonna give you is your self-perception. So I'm gonna talk about these four things, and then we're gonna see how Paul actually addresses these four things. So one is your self-perception. Listen, I don't know this for a fact, but I think that ladies really suffer from this a lot. The first one, my personal opinion, this idea of self-perception. They look at themselves in the mirror and they're comparing themselves to all this other airbrushed photos of women and all this kind of stuff is just terrible, right? And they have this horrible perception, this bad perception of themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting you don't take care of yourself. You understand that, right? It's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about a poor self-image that gives you a bad perception of who you are. The second thing would be resentment. Now, these aren't mine. These are what I've read. These are these four areas in our life that really affect us. The second is resentment. Resentment from what? Well, resentment from past, right? How I was treated in the past, how I was brought up, and things that happened to me. Resentment is a huge one. The third thing is pain. Right? Pain. And how is it that most people try to deal with their pain? Well, they try to self-medicate, don't they? What I mean by that is, I don't know whether it's alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever, but we experience pain, so what we want to do is we want to mask it, and it works for a little while, doesn't it? It works for a little while. Right? No matter what it is, you mask that pain, you feel that pain, that hurt, that wound or whatever, and so you self-medicate some way. It helps you for a little bit until it wears off, and then you're back to the same pain. And the last thing is negative influences. And we'll talk more about this one here in a minute, but negative influence. And that's everything from the people that you associate yourself with, right? I tell my boys, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Like, who are you spending time with? We had a great golf outing this weekend. I have some of the best friends in the world. I live a charmed life when it comes to friends. Who are you allowing to impact you? Who are you allowing to speak into your life? What are you allowing in your life? That's another challenge, right? What are you allowing into your life? What are you reading? What are you watching? Right? What's the kind of music that you're listening to? These are all influences on our life. And if you're not careful, you'll start to just allow these negative influences. You won't even evaluate them, whether they're positive or negative. And you'll allow these to come into your life. So here's the thing. So how are we transformed? Not okay, go out and stop doing those things, right? So how do we do it? How do we deal with these four areas, right? How do we make these? How do we help ourselves to experience transformation in our life? How do we help ourselves? That's what I want to talk about today. Because, friends, here's the thing. I'm here to tell you, if you get this in your head, it's not about you trying hard to change your behavior. It's not about that. It's not about, well, I know this behavior is wrong. I'm going to work really hard at changing my behavior. Right? That's external, isn't it? That's external. What you need to do is, there needs to be a change that happens in here that affects the outward, that affects those things. And that's what we're going to look at, right? What we're going to look at is this: how focusing on we're going to focus on our identity, right? Our identity, because when you understand who you are, that helps change the outside. Then, okay? So, number one is this: how do I change my identity? Well, the first thing is to wear, right? We'll use the same clothing metaphor. To wear my ID. So, to wear my ID, I have to ask myself, well, who am I? Who are you? Paul says this: you have taken off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, listen, which is being renewed in knowledge of the image of its creator. I love these words. He uses two words. Listen. New and renewed. I love that renewed is there, right? because I have a new identity, and I'm constantly, right, because it's a journey, right? I'm constantly being renewed, and the thing that helps me with that is then when I do go back, right, make a same mistake or whatever, I go, yeah, I know, but I'm being renewed. I remember that I'm new, but I'm also being renewed. So this is who you are. And when you fall, you're being renewed. Paul goes on. I love it. He goes on to say this. Now, pay close attention to this because we kind of just miss this a little bit, okay? He says this. Here in Christ, right? And what he's talking about with the Colossians, he says this, there is no Greek or Jew. No Greek or Jew. There is no circumcised or uncircumcised. Barbarian. Barbarians were just what you think, just these they were outside that Jewish Roman culture, right? Greek culture. They were these kind of wild nomads and everything. That's who the barbarians were. Then he says this. Then he says the Scythians. The Scythians were people who were nomadic people who lived in the area of what we would consider Iran right now. And they were considered worse than the barbarians. And what Paul's saying here is totally had to be mind-blowing to them. He's saying, listen, there is no difference. There is no difference, slave or free. Now watch this. But Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's holy people, chosen people, holy and dearly loved, what he's saying is, all those old badges of identity that you carried around. Now, listen. So, think of modern day. Think of now. All the different things that we wear, right? No matter what it is. I'm too tall. I'm too fat. I'm too this. I'm too that. I came from the wrong side of the track. All those badges that we wear, put in here. As many as you can fill, you put in here. And what he's saying is, all those old methods of identity, they're gone. That's what he's saying here. And they're saying, wait a minute, the Scythians? Yeah. No more identity of Scythian. Nope. Christ is in all and all is in Christ. All. What? It's radical. And he's trying to get at, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about no more seeing yourself that way. We're all God's what? Chosen people, holy and dearly loved, brothers and sisters. But do you believe that? Do you believe it? Sometimes. I mean, put in there Republican and Democrat. Really? All the same identity? No, the badge they wear, that's just the wrong badge. Right? He said, no. So look at this word, chosen, holy, dearly loved. Would you say it with me? Chosen, holy, and dearly loved. Now do me a favor. And I know this sounds silly, but maybe you've never said this in your entire life. Put I am in front of that. I am chosen, holy, and dearly loved. I am. And now, maybe you're thinking, well, I said that, but it's really not true about me. Maybe true about other people, it's not true about me. No, it is. Saying that's your identity. You're chosen, holy, and dearly loved. See, what Paul's getting at is Paul's trying to say, listen, you need to understand who you are. Just by saying, I'm not going to do that anymore, I'm not going to do that anymore, that's not going to cut it. What he's saying is, you have to know who you are, and then when you know who you are, what you're going to do is you're going to clothe yourself with the proper clothes that reflect your true identity. Do we believe it? So the key question here for us is, for you and me, is where do you find your identity? Where do you find? Is it from being a good wife, a good husband, a provider, right? A good worker, Let me tell you something. If your identity is found in that, those fluctuate, don't they? Right? Agreed? Those fluctuate. Good. Well, what is good? Sometimes I am good. Sometimes I'm a good husband. Sometimes I'm not so good of a husband. Sometimes I'm, right? Those fluctuate. So it can't be that. We need to listen, and this is something you got to do every single day. Find your identity in the unconditional love of God. That's it, period. That's where you find your identity in the unconditional love of God. So this takes care of the first one, self-perception, right? You start, that you replace all the negative talk with this. I know who I am. I'm chosen, holy, and dearly loved. This is what God says about me, and I'm gonna choose to believe it. I'm gonna choose to believe it. The second root problem is resentment. And the next thing we have to do then is to we wear our ID, we wear who we are, a new identity, we wear it. The second thing is we clothe ourselves with grace. Clothe ourselves with grace. This is what I mean. This is what Paul says. Paul says, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievance you may have against one another. And then he says this amazing line. He says, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Do you remember on the cross when Jesus was dying on the cross and he was just tortured and brutalized and he prayed to God, he goes, God, forgive them. Listen, my guess is no one's ever been treated in this life like Jesus was treated up to the time of his death on the cross. And Jesus said, forgive them. They just don't know. They just don't know. Give them time. Give them time. And in time, they're going to come to know. So just now, just be patient, be kind, be gentle, and forgive them. Who are you holding a grudge against that you just refuse to forgive? Listen, that line should haunt you. Forgive as you've been forgiven. Listen, wrapping yourself, right, clothing yourself in God's grace identifies you. The bumper sticker on your car, the fish on your bumper of your car, no. It means nothing. We clothe ourselves in grace. We no longer, why is it that it seems like today people love outrage? I don't understand it. People love outrage. They love anger somehow, right? And he's saying that, listen, we need to learn how to wrap ourselves in grace. If you're going to make a mistake in life, when Daryl and I first started the church, and people would come to the church often for like a handout and money and stuff like that, and frankly, there are people who are just kind of, playing the system, right? That's where you can get a free handout. But how do you know? How do you know? I said to Daryl, if we're going to err on the side of grace, right? Err on the side of grace. And that's what we did. And we gave. And if we were taken, that's okay. I'd rather be taken and give to somebody who's cheating me than hold back on somebody who's really in need. Well, how about you? Right? I'd rather, if somebody's really in need and they come to ask you, really in need, I don't know how many people, well, maybe there are people who will say no, but we said we're going to err on the side of grace. So, make it personal. Who in your life right now that you have a hard time forgiving? You have a hard time getting past. Remember, Paul goes on to say this. And above all these virtues, all these things he just said, above all these things, put on love. Put on love. Which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of God rule in your hearts, since as members of one body. Friends, if we would just get that, just that. We're all members of one body. The human race. We're all members of one body. And we're called to peace. This was a fashion choice wasn't it, right? Wrap yourself in grace, draped in love or peace, not misery and resentment. Third thing is this: wrap myself in gratitude. Wrap yourself in gratitude. It's like the toga that they wore, right? Wrap yourself up in gratitude, right? Here's what Paul says, listen, and be thankful. Be thankful. Sing with gratitude in your hearts to God. Whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord. Here it is again, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Listen to those words, gratitude, thanks, thankful, thanks. And this addresses our third issue, pain. No matter what kind of pain is. I remember Michelle's mom back when she had cancer. She died of bone cancer. What would we say, 20 years ago, huh, Michelle? 20 years ago. Tell you what, I'm talking about physical pain now, but I'm talking about all pain. She lived her life always thankful. Always thankful. It's funny, you ever talk to somebody, I wish everybody had this opportunity to talk to somebody and go, man, it's so hot outside and my air conditioner's broke in my car. Someone goes to you, wow, you have a car? Wow, that's awesome. It must be awesome to have a car, to be able to not take the bus or walk everywhere, right? Get things in perspective. And learn to be thankful. So Pete's friend, Tunchokin, just was diagnosed with ALS, right? ALS. So your body starts to shut down. You can't do things. Come to a place where you can't swallow. Can you imagine, right? You can chew food and swallow. Wish I could do that again. Learn to be thankful and grateful. I know it's hard because we're in our lives and everything, but just wake up in the morning and open your eyes and be thankful that you have eyes that you can open and you can see. Right? You can see whether it's storm clouds, you can see them. And this helps us a long way in dealing with the painful things in our life when you can wake up every day and say, there's pain, but I have so much to be thankful for. So much to be grateful for. It'll help move us beyond our pain. The last thing is, let me just read it to you, and then let me explain it a little bit. In 3:16 it says this: let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing songs and hymns and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Now it'd be easy just to kind of blow over that and go, that means the Bible. Well, I guess. But what's the word of Christ? What's the message of Jesus? It's everything I'm just saying, right? Know who you are in him and know who others are. See them that way and live in grace and extend mercy and forgiveness and love. Let this dwell in you richly. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like soaking. Dale has a hot tub. We go over there sometimes and soak in his hot tub, right? And you just get, when you're soaking in something, you're just immersed in it, aren't you? You're surrounded by it. You just sit there. Oh, it's so nice. And he's saying, soak in this, the word of Christ. Soak in it. Let that envelop you. Let those things envelop you of gentleness, kindness, mercy, grace, and love. You see how these things, you see how seeing things in a different way, right? How these internal things of knowing your identity, right? Of understanding God's grace to you and soaking in his word, living in gratitude, how when you do those things, what are they going to affect? They're going to affect how you live. They're going to affect how you are in this world. Now, the last one, what it's going to affect is negative influence. Negative influence. Listen, what you let in, it affects you, doesn't it? Don't you agree? Think about it. How many like to go to the movies? You go to the movies? How many you ever cry at a movie? Come on, you cry at a movie? You laugh at a movie? You know, the older I get, I cry at commercials sometimes. Like, toilet tissues. I don't know what. Right? Now listen, you go to the movies and you cry or you laugh. Did they sprinkle something on your popcorn that affect you emotionally? Right? No. What you let in has a real effect on you. Agreed? I mean, you can't deny that. What you let in impacts you in the real world. You're sitting there watching a movie, you know it's all just scripted and written out and all this kind of, and you're crying. What you let in affects you. So what he's saying is, listen, I'm just telling you, be careful what you let in. Be careful what you let in. You might think, oh, that's okay. I can do this and it doesn't affect me. No, it does. It just does. You may not feel the effects of it right then. Okay, today, in this day and age we're living in right now, I've talked to so many people now. You know what they say? I'm done watching the news. Who's done watching the news? I'm done watching the news. I'm done. Why are they saying that? It's affecting them how? Negatively. I'm done. I can't take it anymore. I watch and I get upset. I'm upset all day long. I'm upset people around me. I'm upset driving my car. Everything's bad. I see a sign that I disagree with and I'm against it. Right? Because I'm done. Why? Because what we let in affects us. What we let in affects us. Let me finish with a story if I can. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Lydia, put the pictures up there. This is John Lee Carey and Reverend Wade Watts. Anybody know their story? 1979, John Lee Carey, he was the Imperial Wizard, which is equivalent to national leader for the KKK. He met the Reverend Wade Watts on a radio program. And they were going to debate racism. And the story goes, I have the whole story right here. You can find it online. It's all true story. How he meets him, he walks in the radio station. The good Reverend walks in and goes, hey, Johnny, how you doing? Puts his hand out like this. And he finds himself, he's shaking his hand and he's like this. And all of a sudden he realizes that we're not supposed to touch we're not even supposed to touch a non-white. And he pulls his hand away like this, right? And the good Reverend, it says this. He said, didn't even miss a beat. The Reverend laughed, consoled him, saying, he need not worry, this black would not rub off. The debate was filled with slurs and insults, from Carey. All the while, the good Reverend just smiled and would say things like, but Jesus loves you, and I love you. And then when they were leaving, he showed him a baby that had been abandoned from a black man and a white woman, and the Reverend had adopted the baby. And before Johnny knew it, he had the baby in his hands, and he was holding the baby like this, and then he realized what he was doing. He heard him gave the baby back, and he was so mad, and he left. And his final words, the Reverend's final words to the Klan leader that day was, God bless you, Johnny. He said, and he was telling him that you can't do enough bad or hate or bad things to make me hate you. He said, I'm going to love you and I'm going to pray for you, whether you like it or not. He was so mad at this. It's so, he said he's going to do whatever he can to get back at him. And so they did things like they came to his house. These are all true stories. Came to his house and they threw dead animals in his yard and all kind of stuff. And one time they burned a cross in his yard. And he came out. This is a true story. He came out with like hot dogs and buns. He did. He came out and said, hey fellas, you might need these for your little barbecue. Came out and gave it to him. Smiled, said, I love you, went back inside. One time they came to his house in all their Ku Klux Klan garb, came to his house, knocked on the door. He opened up the door and they were standing there and he goes, fellas, he said, Halloween's not for a couple more months. Come back later. I'll have candy then. He closed the door. And they were like, and they just walked away. One time him and his wife were in a restaurant eating, and Johnny came up with some Klansmen, and they were just in this restaurant. He was eating some chicken, and he was so angry with them. He said, I'm going to do exactly, he was getting ready to cut it with his knife and fork. I'm going to do exactly to you what you're going to do to that chicken. And everybody was standing around, and the Reverend looked at it and goes like this, picks up the chicken and goes, and he kissed it. All the clans, they all started to laugh, you know what I mean? And he left, and the story goes on. It's such a great story. Years passed, and Johnny found himself just kind of disillusioned with life, with everything. And of course, all the Klansmen had Bibles, and the story goes, he picked up a Bible and started reading it. Started reading a lot of the stuff from Colossians, as a matter of fact. Started reading, his heart started to change. And I won't get into all of it, but he ended up becoming a minister, actually, leaving the Klan and everything, going back to his hometown, and no one accepted him. No one accepted his message. So he went to the only man he knew he could help him. He went to this pastor. The first sermon he ever preached was in the church that he tried to burn down. It's an absolutely amazing story. And the little girl who he had in his arms, he's the godfather for that little girl. And this pastor, all he did was say, I'm not gonna be affected by it. I know who I am. It doesn't matter what anybody says, I know who I am. I'm a living grace. I have so much to be grateful for. Soaked in the word of Christ. He changed this man. By how? I struggle with this, so much hate in the world and everything, and violence, and I stick by my claim that love is the answer. And I get the pushback sometimes. Well, how's love going to change somebody breaking into your house? Well, yeah, you're right. But it needs to start way before then, doesn't it? Way before then. Friends, love is the answer. I believe what the Bible says. Love's the answer. That love doesn't fail. And friends, we need to understand who we are. Listen, you need not worry about all the negative and the bad in your life, the things that you do, and beat yourself up over it. You need to understand who you are. Who you are. Be changed from the inside. You know what? You won't have to do anything on the outside. You will change when you start to realize that you are chosen, holy, and dearly loved. When the band come up, we're going to sing that last song together. Sorry I went so late today. Actually, I'm like 4 minutes earlier than I usually am. Let's just listen. I want you. This is a fun song. I love the words of this song. But I really want you to, I don't know if you took notes today or not. I mean, that's okay if but I really want you to think about this message. I want you to think about if just one, like the good Reverend, right? Start to live just a different way. Just one. One can change one. Right? One can change one. You could change one. By knowing who you are. And letting yourself be clothed with the identity of who you are. We're going to sing this last song together, and then Connie, you can just kind of close and
Will do.
wrap up.